Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Joining us to talk about the big story, really from yesterday, but still the biggest story today, our guy Clinton Yates, commentator, ESPN, and host of ESPN Daily, which you can listen to daily. All right, Clinton, you saw the news yesterday of Jason Wright's exit. He'll be a senior advisor through at the latest the end of the year. When you think about the obituary, if you will, of the Jason Wright era of these 4 years, what do you think of? What comes to mind?
I think he was the guy that was put in a tough spot, to be honest, when we're starting things out. He was, coming on as the first black president or whatever the actual title was, already inherently had certain kind of things around it that made people look at him as a pioneer of something that I felt was kind of an undefined role. I mean, he wasn't involved in anything football related, but seemed to always be in the news. And I think that he, because of, just sort of the personality that he has, it turned into one of these things where he was defending stuff that didn't need to be defended. And I didn't really love the way all of that went. I'm never really sure what some people in certain NFL offices, front offices that is, ever really do. And I think he was another one of those people where it felt like, at least to me, the NFL kind of sent him in to make sure that this didn't go completely haywire. And he reached a little farther than he needed to with it.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation because, obviously, I think most people we never hear about that are in positions like his, right? If you're running the business side, we see how teams run, ticket operations, what kind of promotions they put on, and all that stuff he has a hand in. But the fact that he was so forward-facing is, I think, different than most people, and the fact that most fans have an opinion on him is something that most presidents of business operations, I think, in the NFL, that's not the case about and for.
Not at all. And that scenario with Scott where he went after him because of an interview he did, that to me was extremely unbecoming. And I think it also shed some light on just exactly how that franchise it wants to look at itself going forward and who they want to have in the building, period. That kind of stuff can't happen. This idea that journalists are supposed to be nice to players or they're supposed to be setting them up for positions of success in order to gain access, that's so far gone and so far wrong. I will give some credit to him, and I think that he learned from that, thinking, okay, you can't just openly antagonize people trying to do their jobs just because somebody might have been put in an uncomfortable situation. We're all adults here. I think the fan base learned something. I think, quite frankly, a lot of the media corps learned something that we all knew to be true, which is that franchise has been doing that for years. But the question for Harris and this team going forward is, right aside, who are you going to have around? Who are the type of people that are going to be the forward-facing individuals that the media deals with, that the fans deal with, that various business partners or whatever, or people around the league deal with? This particular tenure asks the question of, what does this look like going forward? And I guess he's not part of the proceedings, but it was a very weird stint and kind of a weird job, honestly, to be doing for somebody who people seem to know so well.
Yeah, for sure. Clinton Yates with us from ESPN. Catch him on Around the Horn, of course, ESPN Daily, et cetera, et cetera. Let me ask you one more thing on Wright specifically. Then I want to circle back around and kind of have that conversation about what's next. But the thing with Jason and his legacy to me is you can never separate him from Dan because it's impossible to separate the owner and the president. He's ultimately working for that guy. Some of the stuff he had to do, he was doing technically his job. And my criticism thus was always, well, why'd you take the job? Because there's a lot of stuff you're being asked to do that's not real good. You think that's fair criticism? And if you try to put yourself in Wright's shoes, was it ultimately worth it for him to make that history, do the things that he thought were important to try to make it better while knowing he was going to have to do some bad stuff? Or is it fair criticism to be nah, it wasn't worth it because look at some of the stuff that you had to do along the way?
Wouldn't have been worth it to me. And you know how I feel about Daniel M. Snyder. There's no world in which I'm aligning myself with him on a business context or anyone, never mind a personal one. It was just too awkward to say, I alone know the right path when I am, in fact, the one working for the guy who has led us down the wrong path. That, to an average smart person, you don't have to be a journalist, you don't even have to be a football fan to look at that and say, well, why should I believe you? Give me one reason. There was never really one that ever really materialized. And that was, in my opinion, yes, the reason why you don't take jobs like that with people like that. So, yes, they are inextricably linked, unfortunately. Do I think that he won't be able to go on and do good things in this league or whatever else he does? Yes, I do. But as many people know who have worked in that building, the sense of the resume when it's got his name on it, Daniel M. Snyder's, is hard to wash off. And I hope that he's satisfied with what he chose to do when he came to the D.C. area.
So that leaves what Josh Harris has to do now, which is find the next person. If you think of repairing the business relationships, repairing the fan relationships, getting the stadium stuff done, and ultimately building the stadium, how do you kind of rank the importance of skill sets of whoever the next president of business operations is for the Washington Commanders?
I think the number one thing that they're going to have to work out is whatever's happening with the stadium. The NFL is as well-run a league as far as money-making is concerned, such that if you put in somebody who simply knows how to walk and chew gum at the same time, you should be able to make money. But what happens with the stadium is critical to so many different things. It's critical to, A, being able to build back up a fan base that's willing to go every week. That's literally half the battle in terms of actual Commanders fans, not just people who want to be in an NFL stadium. And number two, there's the regional element of all of this. There's a lot to manage when it comes to the team's old relationship with the state of Virginia going all the way down to Richmond, the team's relationship with Maryland as tenants, the team's relationship nostalgically with D.C. as the old one that got away. There's a lot happening there that is vital to the next few years of what that franchise is going to be, no matter what the choice is. So, yeah, the business will run itself in many ways, and there's a lot to overcome in that regard. But I don't know who or what entity has that kind of adaptability, to be able to figure out all of these different regions at the same time and make everybody happy. Do I have an instant shot solution to all of it? No. Do I think that RFK is still a little bit of a dreamland fantasy world for people that doesn't in fact make sense for DC? Yeah. Do I think the natural place for the team to be is probably Virginia? Sure. But things have changed because, the brother of the governor is somebody you cut off as a franchise years ago. So, or whatever, former governor. So there's all of these bizarre elements that they have to try to make a meal with that, in order to please everybody, is going to be really tricky. That's easily the hardest part of this next task by a mile.
So with that gets me to thinking, which, our conversations sometimes do. Like, would you be prioritizing someone with local ties who understands the region? Think of some of the big businesses, whether it's, you go back to one of these consulting firms, or whether you go to one of the major businesses headquartered here, someone who's got relationships in this area. Are you looking at someone who's navigated something remotely similar in a sports arena? Are you looking at the NFL league office maybe, where they've been involved in this process in some way? And can you poke someone from New York and bring them down here who's already up to speed on a lot of what's going on? Like, where would you be looking because of the uniqueness of what you have to navigate in DC, specific to the stadium, and that being the number one task of the next person?
Well, I can tell you who I won't start with. It's anybody who thought that moving to Potomac Yards was a good idea, but that's another matter. I mean, I do think that
Monumental
there is something
folks,
to be said.
so sorry Clinton has marked you off the list.
There is something to be said for an outsider in this particular position. And while that's difficult for me personally, being a native, I do think that it requires a lot of local know-how, if for no other reason than understanding the history of all of this is important. Because, look, you can go back to RFK, you can do all that stuff, but it's not like you can just start, reliving the experience of being in a headdress or whatever other imagery that we've distanced ourselves from as well with the franchise. That's the hardest part about all of this, is that the history is something that we all just kind of know, but we're not really going to be highlighting in any major way because it requires saying a slur in order to do it. Some people jump at that opportunity. Fans, frankly, people in the media, people in football do it all the time, but in a real life business context, you can't. So that's where the tricky part comes in, and why I think you need somebody that has knowledge of the area and not just somebody who's smart business wise or, arena wise, because there's such a delicate balance of specific histories that you got to find a way around so that you can still manage to foster pride. You can get new people, and maybe if you're really reaching, get people to come back, because a lot of people have written this team off forever because it's just too much of a headache.
No, for sure. Like, the alumni relations with the players is super important. And I think that the Harris Group is started to do a lot of work on that front. And the one thing that I will say is, as we wrap up here, Clinton, is interesting is the Harris Group kept Jason very forward facing throughout their first season. And obviously, that's tailed off probably in part because they knew that this day was coming. Also, the season has ended, and so much more of what was going on around the franchise was around like the draft, and a guy like Adam Peters is here, yada yada. But I think of some of the alumni events that they had last year. I think of, frankly, the press conference that they had to introduce the Harris Group at FedEx, or what at the time was FedEx Field, what is now Commanders Field. That might be relevant as to why Jason is gone in part. That he was the guy that emceed that. Like, they didn't pull one of their broadcasters or anything like that. Like, they had Jason being very forward facing at the beginning. I just find that fascinating that he was such a forward facing part. And I do wonder moving forward how much of a public, forward, outward facing type of person they want now that they have their own football people in place, and maybe they would prefer those people be more out front than, say, Ron Rivera when they took over.
Right. I'll say this. The unfortunate thing about the Jason situation is that had he not come to D.C. with Snyder to do whatever it was he was doing as a relatively high-level but lower-impact henchman or goon or whatever you want to call it, he probably would have been perfect for this job. Alas, the timing was messed up. That's what's so unfortunate about it. None of my beefs for Jason were ever super personal. They were professional to the point that moved into what I think had to do with his personality. But again, I don't have a problem with the idea of someone like that. I just think wrong place, wrong time. And now that you need somebody like that, he's not the guy anymore. It's really kind of a bummer if we're being honest about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. He was a crisis management guy at McKinsey, so he did come in to do crisis management, and they're no longer in crisis. So I'm not surprised that they're moving on to someone who I'm assuming doesn't come from a crisis management world.
No, but he is a football guy, and he's a smart guy, and so this would have been a reasonable place to bring somebody in like this, crisis management aside, and say, hey, what do you think?
Sure.
How should we go after this? Wouldn't have minded that. But once again, the Snyder stench, baby. That thing, you stank.
It's Clinton Yates, everybody. Check out ESPN Daily each and every day in their podcast feed. And, of course, catch Clinton on Around the Horn and read his work at Anscape and ESPN.com. Have a great weekend, my friend. Thank you.
You too, Gregory. Hope your servers are up and running.
Don't we all just wish our servers were up and running?
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.